Thank you for attending this presentation on some common frequently asked questions in the grant process. After you submit your grant material, it will be reviewed not only by your grant monitor, but also by ICEJA's fiscal and legal department. All departments may catch mistakes, question information, or have additional questions that may delay grant execution. Here are a few tips on how to prevent common errors that may delay execution of your grant. As a part of the legal review, the legal sufficiency of the grant will be evaluated and a determination will be made as to whether it was properly drafted. Part of the review of your grant materials is whether it follows the laws, guidelines, policies, and does it satisfy all the requisites necessary to make it legally enforceable. The major goal is to examine the validity and integrity of the grant. As you develop your grant materials and put all the relevant costs down in your budget, questions may arise. Your budget request is reviewed for compliance with the governing cost principles, other necessary requirements, and policies applicable to the type of recipient and the type of award. Sites which are helpful and address cost principles are the 2 CF 200, the Federal Register, the Department of Justice Financial Guide, and the OMB Circular. In Illinois, the grant process has also been streamlined for all state and federal grant agencies. The purpose of this act was to establish uniform administration requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements. This has been streamlined under GATA. You can find the GATA rules under the Illinois Administrative Codes or the Illinois Compiled Statutes. Most grants require certifications to accompany the material. The required certifications depends on if your grant is state or federally funded and whether your agency is a government agency or a nonprofit. If your grant is federally funded and your agency is a nonprofit, you need to submit these 5 forms: the Equal Employment Opportunity Plan requirement, the Civil Rights Compliance Certification, Lobbying, Debarment, and Suspension Certification, Tax Exempt Affirmation Letter, and a Faith-Based Organization Self-Report. Although there may be a number of required certifications, it is most likely that mistakes occur on the Equal Employment Opportunity Plan certification, also known as the EEOP. There are several things you should look for. The EEOP certification must be filled out by the implementing agency and the program agency. The top section with the recipient's information must be completed in its entirety. Afterwards, there are 3 sections on this form, A, B, and C. Fill out the section that is applicable to your agency. If Section A applies, make sure to check the applicable boxes. The Civil Rights Certification must also be completed by the implementing agency and the program agency. If your agency has had findings of discrimination within the past 3 years, your agency must send a copy of all findings made within the past 3 years to ICEJA unless they are already on file with us. Please check the box that applies. The Lobbying, Debarment, and Suspension Certification is filled out by the program agency only. If your grant is federally funded and is a government agency, you need to submit these 3 forms. State universities are considered government agencies. If your grant is state funded and your agency is a nonprofit, you need to submit these 2 forms. If your grant is state funded and is a government agency, no certifications are required. When filling out the uniform application, you must use your agency's legal name. This is the name registered in DUNS. DUNS stands for Dun & Bradstreet Universal Numbering System. Your agency's legal name is used for your registration and pre-qualification. When filling out the uniform application, you are also asked to tender your agency's primary area of performance. The primary area of performance should be either the program agency's office or the location where the majority of the grant activity will take place. The city, state, and 9-digit zip code have to appear in this box. It should not say statewide or should it have multiple locations, or only have the 5-digit zip code? On the uniform application, you must enter your congressional district codes. If you do not know them, they can be located by going to www.elections.il.gov and click on New District/Official Search. You will need your full 9-digit zip code in order to access this information. If you do not know your full digit zip code, you can look it up by visiting the United States Post Office website. When applying for grants, the implementing agency and the program agency are required to have their own DUNS number. You can obtain your DUNS number by going to sam.gov or call the toll-free DUNS number request line at 866-705-5711. This will help ICEJA determine if the agency has any active exclusions from receiving grant funds. You, as the grantee, must comply with applicable registrations as well as maintain the accuracy of the information. If the expiration date has passed or will expire prior to the execution of the grant, the agency's registration must be updated. The FEIN is your Federal Employer Identification Number. It is your unique number assigned to your agency by the IRS. You will need this number as it is required by the Illinois Comptroller in order to disperse grant funds. One of the most common mistakes is an incomplete or missing narrative section in the budget. Each line item in the budget requires its own narrative description. When drafting a narrative, ask yourself the following. Why is it reasonable and necessary for this service? Is a calculation necessary? Is there a proration that needs an explanation? How did I arrive at these costs? If I'm requesting travel, did I state the amount of mileage, conference travel airfare, per diem, and/or lodging and taxes? Are the requests in your budget an allowable use of funds? There are 5 core principles that serve as an important guide for effective grant management as defined in the OMB Circular Cost Principles. Costs must be allowable. They must be reasonable and necessary, allocable, authorized, and adequately documented. Are the costs in the budget reasonable and necessary? A cost is reasonable if it is ordinary and necessary for operations, if it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person, if it follows sound business practices, arm's-length bargaining, if it follows federal, state, and other laws, other regulations, and other terms and conditions. And it must also reflect market prices for comparable goods or services. A cost is necessary if it is for the proper and efficient performance or administration of the program. Are the requests in my budget allocable to the grant? A cost is allocable if the goods or services involved are chargeable or assignable to such cost objectives in accordance with relative benefits received. What does it mean that the costs have to be authorized? The costs cannot be prohibited by federal, state, and/or local laws. What does it mean for costs to be adequately documented? A recipient must maintain proper documentation to provide to evidence to monitors, auditors, or other oversight entities on how the funds were spent over the life of the grant. Proration is usually triggered when personnel are not 100% on the program, or when equipment or contractual expenses are shared by an agency which is not totally funded by the grant. Grant funds can only be used to pay for the share of those expenses attributable to the program. When it comes to prorating budgets, describe in a narrative how the prorated share was determined. This can be done by providing the number of employees or by using the square footage of space. A budget justification is a description of the proposed cost. Generally, it explains how you arrived at that particular cost. Some examples are established rate list, previous year's usage, vendor quotes, and historical cost. We have come to the end of the presentation. If you have any questions or comments concerning the grant process or the grant materials, please contact your grant monitor. Thank you.